Welcome to CMC. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of the CMC Board of Trustees, and I'm also Senior Outreach Coordinator at Ohio State. Today, CMC presents the highest eviction rate in Ohio. Consequences? First, we want to thank our sponsors, the YWCA, Community Shelter Board, Huntington, the Ohio Capital Corporation for Housing, and the Columbus Foundation, each represented by many friends and associates here today. So let's thank them. And now, to introduce our forum and speakers, please welcome Barbara Benham, Executive Vice President, Chief Public Affairs Officer, Huntington Bankshares Corporation.
Thank you, Mindy. And thanks to all of you for joining Huntington in support of the Metropolitan Club today. I think we can all agree that it's never been more salient for us to come together in civil discussion and debate for a purpose we all share, which is to help people lead better lives and rebuild communities. Of course, fundamental to achieving that purpose is the basic human need for a safe, dry, dignified place to sleep and affordable, stable housing from which we can build our lives. We will learn today about the growing numbers of our families that are experiencing the crisis of homelessness. As we seek to understand this complex problem, a community task force focused on preventing the growing numbers of families experiencing homelessness. It was recently convened under the leadership of Franklin County Commissioners Marilyn Brown, the active engagement of our mayor, Andy Ginther, in the city of Columbus, and many of the corporate partners and the nonprofit leaders that are here today. One of the stunning trends uncovered was the increasing incidence of what was once very rare, the occurrence of families experiencing the trauma of an eviction in Columbus. Our panel today will begin to unpack this learning, which has become a root cause factor in communities across the nation. On a little lighter note, one of my favorite parts of the Columbus Metropolitan Club Wednesday tradition is where we get to continue the conversation in the lobby with those wonderful cookies. Today, we're going to invite you to also continue this conversation because of the complex work that needs to be accomplished by joining us on June 7th, when Pulitzer Prize-winning author Matthew Desmond, author of Evicted, Poverty and Profit in American Cities, joins us in Columbus, hosted by the Community Shelter Board, to further address this issue. And invitations are on your table, so please do join us. Now, please join me in welcoming our panel. Many who served on the task force and who are at the front lines of this challenging issue. I know you all share my admiration and appreciation for their leadership, dedication, and service. We're proud to have with us my former colleague and CEO of the YWCA of Columbus, Elfi DiBella, President and CEO of the Columbus Urban League, Stephanie Hightower, the co-founder of Connect Realty, Brad DeHays, and the Vice President of Community Research and Grants at the Columbus Foundation, Dan Sharpe. Dan, thank you for leading us in our conversation.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you to each of you. I'm very grateful for you filling this room today. It's such an important conversation, as are many that are held here at the Metropolitan Club. The topic isn't going away, and it's going to require us as a community to entirely lean in to it. So today, I'm hopeful that you will come away where you've learned more and you feel inspired to act. The spirit of Columbus is strong in our community, and national headlines are picking up on our story of successes: economic prosperity, cultural vibrancy, and an inviting, smart, and open community. However, we know that the tide that raises many of our boats are made of the same waves swamping the life rafts for many of our neighbors. So Barbara mentioned work of a task force in 2016. That work has evolved into and emerged into the Prevent Family Homelessness Collaborative. That collaborative is representative of a cross-section of our community that is focused on reducing family homelessness. It includes funders, government, service providers, and leaders within the private and public sectors. The Prevent Family Homelessness Collaborative is focused on improving community awareness, in addition to aligning with existing and emerging work within our community around policy, economics and workforce, racism, access to childcare, and very germane to today's conversation is a focus on events that destabilize families, such as eviction. The practice of eviction is nothing new, but the attention to the topic has gained momentum in recent months. Likely, that's aided by the swell of data on the comorbidity of poverty, wages, trauma, racism, homelessness, and even access to affordable housing. But the elevated awareness to evictions might also be because of the book recently awarded the Pulitzer Prize for general nonfiction entitled Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. And as mentioned, the author, Dr. Matthew Desmond, will indeed be in town next week for the Community Shelter Board's Under One Roof event. But regardless of why eviction has received attention in the last few months, it's welcomed attention, because many community organizations and landlords work on this every single day, and it's not new to them. What may be new, however, is how our community responds to align and address these numbers. On your table is a placemat with some snapshot figures and further context to how Franklin County has the dubious distinction of being a leader in the state when it comes to evictions. But those statistics are families who have names and have stories associated with them. So a goal of today is to bring awareness to the issue, but also elevate some of the partners, both public and private, that are working on this community need. An analogy of eviction really can be tied to how we think of our own medical care. Evictions are akin to a visit to the emergency room, and we really should be thinking much more about the regular doctor visits, the importance of a healthy diet, and even regular exercise. And all of those activities would certainly keep us from visiting the emergency room. But the housing continuum is also similar in the sense that all of the inputs, supports, and preventions that need to be in place to keep a family from being evicted and essentially out of their version of the emergency room. So a few statistics to build upon that placemat, if you'll allow me, to help set the stage for the conversation. An April 30th Columbus Dispatch story titled "Income Divides and Rising Rents Make More Neighborhoods Unaffordable." It highlighted that although rental costs in the Columbus area remain lower than many U.S. cities, they are increasing at an above-average clip, even outpacing wage growth. Average rents in the Columbus area have increased more than 4% in each of the last 2 years and are expected to rise again by 4.2%, bringing rents to just under $900 a month. The Affordable Housing Alliance has tabulated that in Franklin County, for a household to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at the 2016 fair market rent of $831 per month, that household must earn $15.98 an hour at a full-time, year-round job to afford that. That's just over $33,000 a year. So that's just the tip of the iceberg and just a little bit of insight into how complex this issue is. And it is tremendously complicated, which is why I'm so grateful that we have some community experts joining us on the panel today. So to open it up at a high level, could you, each of you share a little bit about your organization and those you serve and how eviction is woven into that? Elfi, may we start with you?
Happy to do that. Based on the mission of eliminating racism and empowering women, the YWCA Columbus provides critical services in our community for now over 131 years. But there are services in the areas of housing, childcare, women's leadership, and racial and social justice work. And certainly where we see a lot of eviction component and up to the topic for today would be our women's residency program, where we have single women. And stabilize them, but also our YWCA Family Center, which was a community effort where the community once again came together, had a thoughtful and strategic idea of how to address the issue of homeless families in our community. We opened our doors in 2005, and certainly have been a backbone to the community. Having said that, after the recession in 2008, we saw our numbers elevating, especially 2010 and beyond. And I know this will be a big part of our conversation today, but as you can imagine, homeless families that come to us, who are presented to the Family Center, come from every different walk of life. The reason why they became homeless or evicted, every family has a different story, and it's very complex and complicated.
Hi, my name is Brad DeHays. I have Connect Realty and Mid-Ohio Contracting Services. I currently sit on the board for the Columbus Apartment Association. I have a significant amount of rental units in the affordable range, non-subsidized units. So when I was asked by the Columbus Foundation to join the collaborative, it was difficult to turn down. I think they were looking for more of a for-profit, I guess you could say punching bag, to look at the meetings. They've been incredibly hospitable, and I trust you'll be the same way. I've learned a lot. We currently manage over 1,500 units. We own over 700 units. A significant amount of them are market rate and Class B properties, which are just on the top end of affordable. So, my focus on the collaborative has been mainly the logistical side of the eviction process and how we can help take a best practices approach and intervene with some of the knowledge of some of the other members of the board. So thank you for having us today.
Yes, thank you.
So Dan, I'm going to say I'm maybe not an expert, but maybe an agitator. I want to be here today. And so let me say that the Columbus Urban League is our community's oldest civil rights organization, family stabilization advocacy organization here in Columbus, Ohio. I've been here for about 99 years. And I think to probably give you some context for what we do, we really concentrate our efforts in our programming on foundational education, on economic transformation, and family stabilization. And just to give you some context based upon this topic today, one of our departments, Financial Empowerment Services, deal with the issues that we're going to talk about as it relates to the highest eviction rate in Ohio and the consequences of that. And so I want to share just some data for you as we begin this conversation. So most of you probably already know that 1 in 3 families in Columbus live paycheck to paycheck, and that those in poorer zip codes spend up to about 10% of their income on payday lenders. Now, we have a program, education program that we deal with at the Columbus Urban League. And so just over the last 5 months, just the first 5 months of this year, we have had over 732 people that have come to us looking for help as it relates to landlord-tenant mediation, rental counseling. We had about 380 of those people that we had to go into direct mediation with. Our clients who did remain in that housing after we were able to mediate was about 143 of those people ended up staying. We dealt with about 66 folks who we had to find alternative rental and housing for them. And then we had about 5 folks that we had to end up sending to legal aid based upon eviction. For those of you who may not know, but I think this is really an important fact that you need to understand. In 2015, on a weekly basis, there were 354 families that were evicted from their homes. This is a week, 354 families. So the real question for us in this community is, where are these people going once they are evicted? The other big issue that we have is, again, with the landlord-tenant counseling. And again, let me give you some context for what we deal with at the Columbus Urban League. So about a month and a half ago, we had 4 families, probably at least 4 to 5 individuals per family. They came into our lobby. They had been evicted by a landlord. They had been evicted because none of them had paid their rent because their homes or their apartments were infested with bed bugs. And so for them, we're not going to pay our rent because we want you to come and exterminate. But what we then have to counsel them on is to help them understand that you cannot not pay your rent, that you have to go in and you have to figure out how to put money in escrow so that then when we finally get to the court system, then, hopefully there's that money that can be then used for them to come in and exterminate. But the consequences of that are twofold. Number one, where are these 5 families going with children? Number two, as a social or human service agency, I now have the issue of dealing with bed bugs in our facility. I have staff, and I don't know about you or any of you, but if you have, and I see some of my colleagues who deal with this, if you have somebody come and sit in front of you and say, I'm active with bed bugs, think about what would you do? And we have to serve those individuals. And then I have to worry about, then for those families or for my staff people, then they have to go home and hope that they're not infected with bed bugs. And then I have to then figure out how to then incorporate that cost to then go and have their homes exterminated when they go home. Because, as you know, most of us that are in this business, we don't really get a lot of money to do this work. But these are important issues, and I think the one thing that I think is important is we have to start looking at those entities, those of us who are actually doing this work, and if we're really talking about eradicating poverty, if we're really talking about addressing these issues, we have to have and continue to have compassionate people and dedicated people who want to do this work in order for us to begin to change the paradigm. But we really need help from the community to help us. And I know I kind of went off on a tangent, but
Covered a lot of it.
I told you. Agitating.
Covered a lot of important points there, too. So, Brad, this may be for you. We as an audience might have some perceptions or even misconceptions about the eviction process. Can you, at a high level, share with us what that looks like from the tenant's perspective and the landlord's perspective? This isn't something that happens overnight, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different situations that lead to an eviction. So one of the things that we have to look at are similarities and ones that the process can be duplicated. So if we look at simply the non-payment of rent, there are all kinds of triggering factors that create non-payment of rent, and we've focused on those in the collaborative. But for the non-payment of rent, the typical transaction at the management office is someone doesn't pay their rent. They may have came in early and said, hey, I don't have enough money to pay your rent on this day. But once they don't pay their rent, there is a 3-day notice issued, but there's also a forbearance agreement typically offered. A forbearance agreement is a legal document that is an agreement between a landlord and tenant that gives them time to actually make up payment. Now, what you'll find in the marketplace is there are landlords that don't take on this approach, and it's more of a cut and dry approach. But Columbus it's a very well-heeled development and for-profit landlord community. And there are a lot of really good landlords out there that take a best practices approach to having a forbearance agreement offered, having an agreement, giving an opportunity to extend that time frame, penalty-free. And once that process goes through, either someone turns down and says, no, I'm not taking the forbearance agreement. Most of the time they do. And in the case that maybe by the end of the month or 2 weeks they don't make payment, either the partial payment or the full payment, depending on what the agreement was, at that point then we proceed with the eviction process at the courthouse. They then set up the eviction hearing where in Franklin County your attorney can attend for you. And if you ever go down to one of these, attorneys will be there with a stack of folders going through it. It's a very rigid process, and a lot of them go through. I think there's 80 or 90 a week, is that? So it's a significant amount. And what ends up happening is some tenants come there and if they have legitimate disputes, there is a mediation allowed. However, for non-payment of rent, 85 to 90 out of 100 won't be there. And it just goes through. And then what happens is there's no interaction. There's no interaction between the landlord and the tenant. And then the tenant moves on. And what happens is the eviction then goes on their record. And a lot of times they don't understand the circumstances that come with it. And one of the things that I've learned at the collaborative, which has been a huge learning process for me, because when I joined, obviously I have a lot of Class B and market rate apartments, which the insular way to look at it is, well, people don't go homeless when they're evicted from our properties. What I've learned is that's exactly where they go homeless. Michelle Heritage at the Community Shelter Board told us it is a cascading effect. And if you think about it, there is a trigger that occurs in their life because there's not enough cushion in their income to, if they get a flat tire, if they get sick, Christmas time. So I started looking at, cyclical, seasonal changes in evictions. We have a heavy density of evictions in February. And the reason why is either utility costs rise and they can't cover it, or people just want to pay for Christmas gifts for kids and they don't budget. So what happens is they feel that come February. Well, what we've learned is from that eviction, once they leave that Class B or market rate property, and you have the data in front of you as to the, who typically end up in a homeless shelter, it then goes from there to a Class C property, because that's the only ones that'll take people with prior evictions. So what happens is from there, maybe another, they then have a collection on them from the prior landlord. That goes through Fabco or some other collection agency, because again, it's not a collaborative effort. It's two sides conflicting. So then what happens is from there, they then get evicted from the next place, and then they have to go and move in with a relative, friend, someone they know, live on a couch. From there is where they go into a homeless shelter. So that realization is something that we've been dealing with for the last 8 months, I think, since I joined the collaborative, and it's a kind of a shock and awe effect when you see the widening house gap that we're dealing with, the economic forces that are pushing rents up, and how fragile the typical budget from one of our tenants is.
So if I could jump in, to talk about the consequences that you just talked about. So one of the things that also impacts is your credit score. And so at the Columbus Urban League, we just launched earlier this year a program called 700 Credit Score Initiative, because we think that we should have a 700 credit score community. And probably 95%, especially of those individuals who take our course who are TANF eligible, you will find on their credit score there are numerous eviction pieces or notices that are on their credit score that we then help them to mediate or then help them to figure out how to then get them off of their credit score. And so that's one of the consequences. As we know, then when your credit score is adversely impacted or affected, it then impacts you being able to be bankable. And most of our folks are not bankable at this point. So what that does is when you start with those the constant moving or the constant being evicted out of apartments, it does have those lingering impact that does have an adverse impact on you long term, as more so than what I think people realize.
So I'd love to build on that. And Elfi, I'm thinking of some of your residents at the Griswold.
Maybe not so much at the Griswold, but certainly at our family center.
Sure.
But yeah, I'd love to build on some of the points that Brad made, and certainly both of you. When we look at, if you look at your placemat in the face of homelessness, it talks about women. It is absolutely right. When 95% of homeless families in this community, the female is listed as the head of household. Even if there may be a male partner, it's still the female. Of that, 70% of those families is a single female head of household. The average size family is 2 families. Now back to the statistics of what you talked about, of how much it costs to have a fair market apartment in this community. And I'm so grateful that so many of our housing partners are here and support us. We couldn't do the important work we're doing. But when you look at 33,000, a little bit over 33,000 for an average fair market apartment of two rooms, that's amazing when you think about that. The average annual income of our families that we serve at the Family Center is $16,080 to be exact. And that's challenging, especially when you think about their female head of household, and we know there's a wage gap component as to how much women earn compared to their male counterpart. So there are challenges, and I think what is important for us to put in perspective, there's no one thing that makes a person homeless or gets them evicted or has them not be able to pay their rent. There are multiple factors in their life. When you look at, I talked earlier about the Great Recession, and then in 2010 we saw the numbers climb of homeless families in our community, and they've been steadily climbing. But the idea, what happened is we had a lot of two income earners come down to 1 income, or somebody lost their job and they were not able to get another job for a living wage. And on it goes. It's that one medical bill that sends you over the brink. It's that one car break, that you can't afford to break, but you can't get to work and you lose your job. It's that single mother, right, she's underemployed, she has been evicted once, she has 2 children and one is disabled. There are a lot of challenges. And if you've never done it, there are many components where you can have reenactments, but it's incredibly hard and complicated to be a person who is poor, who lives at the federal poverty line, which is certainly true with an annual income of $16,000. And so when we look at the barriers that we have to homelessness or being evicted, it is, and I'm grateful to say that we have so much representation here, whether it's the Columbus Women's Commission and others, the income gap, being paid a living wage is critical. Lack of non-traditional or affordable childcare. The majority of our families will have a better job getting a job in the 2nd or 3rd shift, but then they don't have that affordable childcare available. There's a lack of transportation. For example, wherever they may be living versus where the child goes to school versus where their job is that they get. There's a lot of challenges. There's certainly the benefits cliff, which is critical for all of us. If you have a criminal record, you have a hard time. And certainly, and I'll piggyback on what you said, we do have that structural racism and sexism component, where we have the statistics that show that women and women of color get evicted at a higher rate, domestic violence survivors get evicted at a higher rate. We are seeing more and more barriers that are more challenging, underlying mental illness. And as much as we know and we appreciate all the housing providers and our partners, we know that we need more affordable housing in our community, if not subsidized housing, that is more of a permanent supportive component, because we are seeing more families where the parent will have that mental illness component, and there's just no way that they can live on their own stably, independently, and remain stable. And so while we give them the tools to find housing, find a job if that's what they need at the family center, and certainly with Urban League and everything else, sometimes their challenges are just so much they need more help in order to maintain stably housed. And that's why we're so supportive of talking about how do we prevent the eviction, how do we prevent homeless so they don't even come to us? What can we as a community do, and I know you're all supportive of that, to prevent that?
So in a few moments, we will be taking audience questions, so I would encourage you to head over to the microphone by the door on the north side of the building. But Brad,
I want to make one point. So we kind of have 2 issues. We have the housing gap, and we have evictions. And if you look at it, evictions are a byproduct of the housing gap. Think of it, it's a supply-demand market. We're out of balance. We have some phenomenal nonprofits in the room, some excellent developers in the room. But the Affordable Housing Alliance said that we have a 54,000 unit shortage that they're trying to cut in half in 10 years. So let's put this into perspective. I mean, you see all the cranes and everything downtown. I see Director Shoney in the room. I think right now, is there about, 1,300 units being built downtown? Obviously, those are market rate. But I'm just putting that into perspective as to how scary that is. We all think, oh, downtown is booming. It's people are coming in. All those cranes, all that construction, all that money being put in, that's 1,300 units. We're 54,000 units short. So the thing, we're not going to incentivize our way out of this. It's a huge issue. Now, one of the things we found out on the byproduct of evictions, it's about the timing, the fragile nature of everybody's income gap. The timing of assistance is critical. During that, because it could be a $40 problem that cascades into thousands of dollars. And there's an alignment of interest between landlords and tenants that I think a lot of people made, previously before we had collaboratives, just looked over, and thought it was all a conflict. Well, the issue is, if we can get assistance at the right spot in the process, we can avoid a significant percentage of those evictions from ever occurring. Because we can recognize those triggering events, we can get other landlords in to adopt this best practices, and there will be a burden share. A typical cost on a typical turn of an eviction is usually 3 times what the monthly rent is for that unit. And if it's a full turn, it could be 10 times It could be a 1 year worth of rent for that unit. So we do not want to turn units. We do not want to evict. But it's one of those things to where there could be a burden share if another group came in at the right time with rapid assistance. I think landlords would be open to that discussion because, you can recognize what tenants have had that triggering event. They've been paying on time for 3 years, then all of a sudden, boom, their relative gets sick and they get hit with bills. And that's a repeat situation. So that's what we're looking at. And we've had a lot of assistance with other great property owners, and we're bringing them to the table to try to do a kind of a pilot program and see how it works.
So, Brad, I guess I would push back a little bit and disagree with the fact that I think we do need to incentivize developers in this community to look at figuring out how to build more affordable housing. I think we also need to look at the Section 8 voucher program at the federal level, and are we advocating to make sure that we expand and strengthen that? So, that's where I guess I would push back to look at and say to, our elected officials, to those individuals who are at the place where they can incentivize our developers in this community to look at, where you're looking at all those cranes downtown, can some of those cranes and some of that building be geared towards more affordable housing, and how do we incentivize those people to actually get there?
I am pro incentives for need. So.
I'm pro donations, just saying.
I think I heard Hal Keller slam the table. I agree 100%. I think it's just such a large gap that we have to figure out a way to really get for-profit developers to pay. I think there's a lot of barriers to entry into this market. It's very sophisticated. You'd think for something that looks like a relatively low sophisticated product, if you try to ever fill out a low-income housing tax credit application, I had to hire a consultant. I mean, it's very sophisticated. The people in this room that are in that field, they know, it is very detail-oriented work. And I think that it's restrictive to other people getting into the industry. And I think, I'm not saying it's wrong. I don't have a solution. But there are a lot of things that we need to look at, like the cost of the new build on these different apartment complexes. I think in that same Affordable Housing Alliance component, they actually had, it was we look at price per square foot. It's $250 a square foot to build an apartment out there, and that's what we're paying downtown. So that was something that we were looking at.
Can I?
Very briefly.
CMHA and OCCH and Homeport, you name it, Move and Prosper. I think there are a lot of great initiatives going on, but I think we just need more. And I think everybody agrees that we need more. And so I think we as a community just need to come together and find out how can we do that? How can we make that happen? And also, I think, Brad, you're absolutely right. Sometimes in order to keep a family from becoming homeless or from being able to not pay their rent, it's just a small, call it a stipend or whatever. Sometimes it's hard for our families while they're still housed, but they are vulnerable, housing vulnerable. And so they need that financial assistance, and there is financial assistance in the community, but sometimes it's not readily available, PRC and you name it. But if you look on your placemat, there's things that cities can do, and those are things that we can look at. We can look at tenant and landlord relationships. There are many landlords who don't want to rent rent to somebody who has been formerly homeless or has an eviction. And I think we need to have that communication of these are good people. They just had bad things happen to them. And the same goes for the tenant. I think we need to have more education for our families of what it means to have a good landlord-tenant relationship, budgeting, financial literacy, and we have so many wonderful community partners, certainly Huntington and many others in the room, do that on an ongoing basis. But there are many things that we can do and we have to do.
Well, and I guess I would say, Elfi, I agree with everything. But again, I think we already have, as you mentioned, people in this community that are doing this work. And I think is how do we build capacity with those that are already doing? We don't need to create new organizations. This is the one thing that irritates me about our community and that I love so much is when something's not going right, somebody has this brainchild, we got to go create something new. But the reality is what we're not doing is we're not supporting the entities that already exist that are doing the work. We're not supporting them. And so Well, and so the expertise is in the room, the expertise is in our community. But how do we help these entities build capacity so that we can have more affordable housing, so that we can have those incentives and those programs for developers? But I think a lot of it, too, and it goes back to what you mentioned, this is really about racism to a certain extent, too. When you look at the numbers of 71% of African-American women are homeless, that is 3 times the national average for African-American women who are homeless. Now, you know, and Michelle and I have had this conversation. You know, the Columbus Urban League, we don't do homelessness, but we don't have a choice but to begin to be a part of this conversation, because this is about the African-American community, that nobody, you know, if this were 71% of majority females, would we be at this state? Would we have let this thing skyrocket to this point? I don't think so. When you look at the number of ex-offenders who are coming back in our community, again, who are African-American, when we look at what's happening with our infant mortality rate in this community, it's African-American. So, you know, I think we have, as a community, some other questions that we need to begin to start asking, and we need to start having and continuing to have conversation about how racism really does play an integral part of why these numbers look the way they look, why things are not being addressed in a significant way, and again, why, when you have people and partners already here in the community that are doing this work, why they're not being supported in a way to help build capacity so that we can begin to deal with these issues.
At this time, we will transition to take questions from the audience, which is a tradition here at CMC. Please state your name and ask your question, and as a helpful reminder, please refrain from long statements or any editorial comments.
You got the wrong guy at the mic. My name's William Carpenter. I'm currently a real estate agent with Carlton Realty, and I grew up in Columbus, grew up in the short north. I have been a substitute teacher. Currently, I'm also a strategic life coach. I work with singles and couples and primarily men. And I want to offer some brief complementary perspectives and solutions. Ideally, when we look at changing our culture, we do it with the youth. And starting with instilling core values and a strong belief system. Because these problems that we're addressing and pouring money into can be prevented by helping the children grow up to have stronger core values, belief systems, and understand what it's like to be in relationship, how to take care of their health, and how to handle their money, which is still not taught in depth in the educational system.
Is there your question, sir?
Another perspective is the right to work, to strengthen the middle class, and have more intervention and empowerment for men particularly, which is a fascinating topic.
So I guess I would say I take exception with that, about individuals who are in these situations not having core values. Your core values may not be the same as what their core values are. And so what we have to also take a look at is, you know, the way we were raised and the way you are raised, those values, not to say that there's certain core values that are indisputable, but when you don't have a roof over your head, when you don't have food on your table, when you don't have a mother in the house that is taking or making sure that you have breakfast in the morning, or that there's dinner on the table at night, or someone to help you with your books. And we have to stop expecting the public school system to be the end-all, be-all for every problem that goes on in our households. It's about how do we as a community come together again and start to deal with these issues and start putting money. You know, what may be something that's minimal for us and our kids is maybe not the same as for somebody who's been raised in poverty. And so if you don't really understand it, if you haven't been in some of these households, if you don't understand, as Elfi said, all of the factors that go into why they've gotten where they're at, trust me, nobody wants to be poor. Nobody wants to be hungry. Nobody doesn't want to have a roof over their head. Yeah. Nobody doesn't want their kids not to have a great education. Everybody does. It's just how we go about getting to it.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think, we have to be
Mr.
careful not
Carpenter,
to make.
I'd encourage you to stick around and enjoy the cookies and conversation afterward. We're going to take our next question with all due respect.
Hello, I'm Carol McGuire. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part in this panel. It's been an enormously enlightening conversation. Back to Brad's comment about sometimes it's only $40 that makes the difference, that becomes the tipping point as to somebody staying in housing or being evicted. And I've heard both Stephanie and Elfi make similar remarks. The Columbus Foundation has a fund called Gifts of Kindness. Dan, we affiliate there with about 15 different organizations?
Over 20.
20 now, that identify families and individuals who are in need. And that fund is there precisely for that kind of assistance of a very, very minimal amount of money that might make all the difference in the world. It's a wonderful service that we have here in this community, but it's only one of, I think, many things that we would hope all of us could do. You have a room full of 260-some people here. We've talked about agencies and what they are able to do, but what about all of us sitting in this room? What recommendations would you have for what we as individuals can do? Thank you.
That sounds like an Elfi question.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go for it?
Well,
I think you.
Well, I'll buy you some time, and that was an unprompted
That was
question
an
about
unprompted-
gifts of kindness, but certainly thank
Yeah.
you for that.
And we use gift of kindness all the time for our families at our family center, but also at our women at our women's residency program. There is so much all of you can do. It's creating the awareness, being aware of what is going on in the community, and not only supporting it financially with all the different organizations we talked about and many other worthwhile ones, but also being part of the solution. When we look at 2016 and we talk about having close to 1,500 households being homeless in this community, that's about 5,000 individuals. 3,000 of those are children, the majority of those under the age of 5 years old. And so we as a community have to come together, because we always do come together. So it's creating awareness, it's that ongoing support and call to our elected officials to help us make the right decisions, make change happen. It's certainly keeping an open mind that these families are not bad families, they're not lazy families. They are families who have bad things happen to them. They're hardworking, but when you have, when you have your child who's dating, when you're a single mom and you have 2 children and the boy is dating a young girl and they break up and her brother shows up and shoots your son at your home, and then you get evicted because your landlord, no disrespect, your landlord does not want to have that kind of stuff going on. That's not right. And so those are the families and some of the families we serve. And when they come to us at the Family Center, they have a lot to worry about. There's majority of them single moms, single parents with 2 children. The children don't, we stabilize them, we help them stay in school, but there's a tremendous pressure on these families to stabilize. They have to find a job at times, or a higher paying job. They have to find housing, and they have to be there for their children to make sure everything goes okay. And we also find more and more a larger number of parents who are, that 18 to 24-year-old. And it's hard for anybody at that age to stabilize it. So we as a community, not only the nonprofits who work in that arena, but we all have to have the compassion and the support to make something happen, to make a change happen in our community for these most vulnerable citizens of our community.
Yeah, I think I would never marginalize a situation like that. I mean, I think that's exactly, why we're here. That's horrible. But that does happen. It happens a lot. The thing that we're looking at is, I would say with everyone in the room, there's a lot of caring out there. I think that's a start. I would say just paying attention to what our collaborative is doing, because, we need to go to work, and we've been at work. So we're actually going to put our process with this pilot program in place with a test group of landlords for this lifetime interaction or intervention, and try to provide that need. And we're going to see how it works. We're going to see how the landlords embrace it. We're going to get a couple wins, success stories, and we're working with, as Stephanie was saying, other groups that are already doing work in living wage. There's 20 other sub-columns to this, all aiming at the same solution. And I think these other groups that are doing it, we're working with them collaboratively. And I think, for what I'm in on this is the process of the eviction. That alone right there is probably going to take us another 6 months until we have gone through a couple cycles to see, hey, is this lifetime interaction? How can we do it? How can we do it without discriminating? Because we can look at the evictions and we can see that you could easily curtail this to one group. Well, we can't do that as a landlord. So you can discriminate both ways, and that's the thing that we're looking at. And we've got the right people at the table, so I would just say, kind of staying tuned would be a big deal, because the group's going to do big things.
And I would agree with that, and we're so grateful to have Brad at the table, because he's, like several others, he gets it. He's that landlord, he's that developer who gets it, and who wants to be part of the solution. And so I'm excited about us coming together to come up with this pilot of how can we have better opportunities to stop that eviction process so it doesn't go down the road to no return, and have those opportunities. So I love that. And Stephanie, my Y team over there, we're like high-fiving, and we're ready to work with you on racism. And you name it, we're ready to join you at the hip.
And I'd like to say also to respond to Carol, in how can we help. I think, both Elfi and Brad have said it very well. It is about, continuing this kind of support of initiatives like this, supporting our elected officials who do this kind of work and start these kinds of initiatives. And, Commissioner Brown started this work. She brought everybody to the table. And now we got to keep that momentum going. So we have to make sure we support those elected officials that are doing this kind of work, that get it. And a lot of times they always get, the ugly end of the stick. But we've got the group together. We have people like Brad that are at the table. We haven't beat him up too bad yet.
We love Brad.
But that's the kind of thing we have to do in order to move these kinds of initiatives forward, is have that public-private partnership in order for us to begin to address issues.
And I think Columbus is the community for that. We've done it, we do it over and over again, and so we need you all.
Great. Next question, please.
My name is Gracie Wynn. I'm a social worker with Lutheran Social Services. I run the Stable Families Program, which is, as Stephanie said, we're one of the programs that actually help families prevent evictions here in Columbus. And my question was for Brad, but anyone on the panel can answer. We've had a really hard time at our program to find landlords that are willing to work with us, willing to work with our families, and willing to work with our programs. And sometimes we have clients that, they're stuck in this cycle of poverty, and they've been evicted 2, 3, 4 times. And, our funders and, all of you in the community are asking us social workers and case managers to work miracles here. And we're having a really hard time to doing that. And we really need landlords to be, on our side and to support us and to support these individuals and clients that we're trying to get back on their feet, and we're trying to help be, productive members of our society. So Brad, the question I have for you is, what are the kind of conversations you're having on your board about landlords and rental properties and other people in the rental industry trying to be proactive and work with these programs here in Columbus?
So the issue with landlords is that obviously everyone's busy, and what happens is sometimes there's a detachment from the management office. I've been able to call out. I looked at the heat map, and you know who owns what properties. I mean, if you've been investing and buying and selling real estate in Columbus for a while, you kind of know, hey, who owns what. And so I reached out to a few developers and property owners that I knew that had successful management companies, and they were more than willing to sit at the table with Jeff Beal and I and have a live discussion and kind of just pick through some of these misinterpretations, And I think that that's where it's at. I would suggest reaching out to the Columbus Apartment Association. I think that you have a phenomenal group there that has the open ear of landlords all across Columbus. I think that, there are similarities in what we want, and I think more people come to the table. But the big thing we're trying to do with our collaborative is we're trying to create that tested standard, so it's not just a shotgun blast of, hey, we're going to bring this service, this service, this service. We want to say, hey, look, we've done this, we've tested it, it works. Here's a source of capital or several sources of capital. Here's the group that's going to intervene, and there could be a burden share, and if we can show economics to make it worthwhile, that's what we're shooting for right now. So I would just say, first step now, either landlords or Columbus Apartment Association, but we haven't done enough work right now to be able to really, set the process.
We have time for two.
And we've had people also, my folks have the same issues. Probably we all need to talk a little bit more so we can figure out what those best practices are that we're doing, that maybe, and we might have some context. I know there are some landlords here that we work with who have said once we get engaged, we usually do have a good end result. So maybe we need to communicate a little bit better amongst ourselves, those of us who are doing this work, and figure out how we can collaborate.
So we have time for two quick questions and even faster answers to those two quick questions.
Very much for the panel today. This is excellent. Thank you for, I'm Amy Claiborne with Strategic Opportunities. You connected the issue of eviction to affordable housing, and you've mentioned the need for more affordable housing. There's a limit because of federal funding on how much can be built, and our community does a fabulous job of submitting the applications to get as many projects built here as possible. Other communities across the country using local county funds are funding affordable housing, both in terms of building it and rental assistance. What can we do here locally to empower our elected officials to want to take that next step, to use local resources to help solve this problem, which if you don't have a home, you're not going to be part of the economic fabric and do well in school. So thank you.
So one of the things I could say is if you look at the gap of 54,000 units, the cost of new, but we can't build Class B property. So if I'm going to go out there and I'm going to build a building, I can't build it to where it's economically makes sense without incentives to rent to low income. That's why incentives are there. So, but one of the things we have is the Affordable Housing Alliance did a study that we have over 5,300 units between 1 and 3 families that are vacant here in Central Ohio. And if you take that to the number of vacant units in apartment complexes that are vacant because they need renovation, you're probably over 100,000 units. One of the things, though, that the tax credits that are available, low-income housing tax credits, it's a lot of money. All the groups that are involved do a phenomenal job, but it costs a lot of money to build new real estate. The issue is we have a lot of existing real estate on this heat map in these markets, because if you look at where these are at, these are apartment complexes built between 1950 and 1970 that are at the end of their useful life. So I would say the low-hanging fruit is to incentivize taking existing properties and getting them back in service. Because what also it'll do is the people that are building the properties downtown are not the ones that live in these apartment complexes. Right? These are prevailing wage contractors and high skill set contractors building these high rises. If we start renovating apartment complexes in our Central Ohio communities that are existing, it opens the employment base up to a lot of laborers, and because they're labor heavy. So that's not the solution, but it's a solution. And it's probably the low-hanging fruit to get the most bang for your buck and to get the right people working on the project so you can have this cyclical elevation of wage.
Thank you. Next question, please.
One thing is it possible to do education and awareness starting in high school and colleges so that people understand what their rights are as tenants? Can we create a handbook that could be provided to give to people, explaining to them their rights as tenants and the rights and responsibilities of their landlords, starting that education earlier? Is it possible to have, I guess you would call them regular, ordinary, everyday people being on some of these collaborations, committees, and involvement? And no offense to anybody in the room, some people probably aren't trying to figure out how to pay their rent. So you need to maybe have somebody who's been there, done that, read the book, seen the movie, living the life, to be a part of the collaborations, committees, and councils to help you understand what they're dealing with. You talk about living wage, you raise people's wages, and just the FYI, I worked for the city many years ago. They gave me a raise, and I had to figure out how to decline it, which they wouldn't let me do because it knocked me off of my food stamps, my child care, and things like that. Can we talk about how to cut the red tape when I need to apply for a PRC, and it takes them months to process it and approve it for me to get the car fixed, for me to get back and forth to work? Can we talk about starting other funds besides the gift of funding, the gift of kindness, because you have to be involved with a program or service that is under the gift of kindness to access it, because I can't keep doing the GoFundMe accounts. Can we talk about financial education and awareness?
Those are a
with
lot
young
of
people?
questions. Can we stop the list there?
I
and
was
have
able
them-
to ask a question because I didn't do all the other stuff explaining who I was, because some of you already know who I am, and don't call my boss and tell him I had the list of questions, because he already knows
Very
that.
briefly, please.
So they don't have to be answered here. You can do it online. You can shoot
Or
it through
over
the email.
cookies.
Or what?
Or over cookies as well.
Or over cookies, but those are some of my questions, and I can finish the list another time. But definitely starting with younger people, education and awareness, and getting some people that are living the life, because the people that make the rules have never lived the life. And so it's kind of hard for you to play the game if you're not on the field.
Very good point. Great.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk outside. I mean, we can go on.
I guess two things I would like to highlight is that Eric Janis from Franklin County is part of the collaborative, so we know Job and Family Services is actually inviting and looking at the PRC process and speeding it up and changing it, so that's exciting news. And I know there are many organizations who work on you know, those handbooks you were talking about, but we can talk more outside.
You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please help me thank our partners, YWCA and the Community Shelter Board. Our sponsors, the Columbus Foundation, Huntington, and the Ohio Capital Corporation for Housing. And our speakers, Elfi DiBella, Stephanie Hightower, Brad DeHays, and Dan Sharpe. And thanks to all of you for being here. We hope to see you here next week.